The moment you hear what I'm about to show you, you'll understand why some powerful people would rather this never be discussed openly. This is not about secrets stolen from a vault or classified files leaked by a spy. It's about patterns hiding in plain sight. It's about moves that look random until you connect them. And once you do, the picture becomes uncomfortable. Because when you step back and see how the pieces fit together, you realize that the story most people are told is only a fraction of what's actually happening. This isn't about hating a leader or praising one. It's about understanding power, fear, and the quiet calculations that decide the fate of nations long before headlines appear. If you listen carefully, by the end of this story, you'll see why showing this perspective makes some leaders furious, not because it's false, but because it's dangerously close to the truth. For years, Vladimir Putin has been portrayed in simple terms. To some, he is a master strategist, always 10 steps ahead. To others, he is reckless, impulsive, driven by ego and nostalgia. But both of these images miss something important. Real power doesn't operate in extremes. It survives in the gray zone, where decisions are shaped by history, insecurity, and a constant fear of losing control. To understand why certain actions provoke such strong reactions from the Kremlin, you have to go back, not just to recent conflicts, but to the mindset that formed long before Putin ever became president. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it wasn't just a political failure. It was a psychological shock. An entire system vanished almost overnight. Borders shifted, influence evaporated, and millions of people woke up in a world where their country was suddenly weaker, poorer, and humiliated on the global stage. For many Russians, this wasn't a liberation. It was chaos. And for a man like Putin, who had spent his early career inside the rigid structures of Soviet intelligence, that chaos left a permanent scar. Power, to him, became synonymous with stability. Control meant survival. And weakness. Weakness invited disaster. This is where the story usually simplifies things. People say Putin wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. Others say he just wants respect. The reality is more complex. What he wants above all else is predictability, especially near Russia's borders. Every move NATO makes, every alliance that shifts closer, every revolution in a neighboring country is viewed through one lens: risk. Not moral risk, strategic risk. The risk that Russia's sphere of influence shrinks until it disappears entirely. Now here's the part that changes how you see everything. What truly angers powerful leaders isn't criticism. It's exposure of logic. When you reveal not just what they did, but why they did it, and how predictable it was, you strip away the illusion of mystery. You turn a strongman into a man reacting to pressure. Take the way modern conflicts are framed. The public sees sudden invasions, dramatic speeches, bold threats. But behind the scenes, the groundwork is laid years in advance. Economic dependencies are created. Energy pipelines become leverage. Media narratives are tested and refined. Red lines are drawn quietly, then crossed slowly to see what reaction follows. When reactions are weak, the line moves again. This pattern didn't appear overnight. It evolved. And once you recognize it, you start seeing repetition everywhere. Military exercises that look defensive but rehearse offensive maneuvers. Diplomatic talks that fail publicly but succeed privately by buying time. Cyber operations that probe systems not to destroy them, but to map them for later use. Showing people this pattern is dangerous, not because it encourages rebellion, but because it encourages clarity. And clarity is the enemy of manipulation. One of the most misunderstood aspects of modern power is how little it relies on brute force alone. Tanks and missiles matter, yes. But they are often the final act, not the opening scene. Long before soldiers move, narratives move. Fear moves. Doubt moves. Allies hesitate. Opponents argue among themselves. By the time a dramatic action occurs, half the battle has already been won without a shot being fired. This is why information control matters so much. It's why journalists are pressured, why dissenting voices are labeled as traitors, and why alternative interpretations are mocked or dismissed. Not all suppression is violent. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's as simple as flooding the space with so much noise that truth becomes just another opinion. Now imagine what happens when someone cuts through that noise and lays out the structure underneath. Not emotionally. Not angrily. Calmly. Step by step. That's when the anger begins. Because suddenly, the audience is no longer reacting, they're analyzing. And analysis leads to questions. Questions lead to doubt. And doubt is contagious. The irony is that many of the actions meant to project strength actually reveal insecurity. Massive military parades aren't just celebrations, they're signals. Constant references to external enemies aren't just warnings, they're tools to unify a population through fear. The more uncertain the internal situation becomes, the louder the external threats sound. This isn't unique to Russia. It's a pattern seen throughout history. Empires at their peak rarely shout. Empires under pressure do. When economic growth slows, when demographics decline, when technological gaps widen, leaders face a choice. Reform and risk losing control, or distract and consolidate power through confrontation. The second option is often easier, faster, and more emotionally satisfying. But it comes with consequences. Because every aggressive move teaches others how you think. Every threat reveals your priorities. Every escalation reduces your room to maneuver. This is why showing these dynamics matters. It reframes events. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen?" people begin asking, "What pressure made this inevitable?" And that question is far more dangerous. Once you understand that many global crises are not sudden explosions but slow, visible build-ups, you stop being surprised. You start recognizing warning signs. You see how rhetoric changes before action. You notice how justifications shift over time. First it's about protection, then history, then security, then survival. The story is always adjusted, but the direction remains the same. This is also why certain comparisons are never welcome. When people start drawing parallels between past empires and current powers, it forces uncomfortable reflections. No leader wants to be reminded how previous strongmen ended, not because of invasion, but because of internal decay accelerated by overreach. And here's the part most discussions avoid. Fear doesn't disappear at the top. It intensifies. The higher the position, the fewer honest voices remain. Advisors become cautious. Bad news is softened. Optimistic scenarios are rewarded. Critical thinking is seen as disloyalty. Over time, decision-making becomes insulated, disconnected from reality. At that point, even rational leaders begin making irrational choices, not because they've lost intelligence, but because their information ecosystem has collapsed. Showing people this process doesn't just criticize one man. It exposes a system. And systems don't like being exposed. That's why a simple breakdown of cause and effect can feel more threatening than accusations. When you demonstrate that certain outcomes were predictable, even avoidable, it removes the aura of inevitability. It suggests that power is not destiny. That choices matter. That alternatives existed. And if alternatives existed, responsibility exists. This is where the narrative becomes personal for those in control. Because responsibility is something power tries very hard to escape. The public may forget slogans. They may forget speeches. But they remember patterns once they see them clearly. They remember who escalated, who ignored warnings, who benefited, and who paid the price. This is why leaders often react harshly not to insults, but to analysis. Insults fade. Analysis stays. By now, you can probably see why presenting this perspective causes discomfort. It doesn't rely on rumors or secret documents. It relies on observation, on connecting dots anyone can see, but few are encouraged to connect. And once those dots form a picture, it becomes very difficult to unsee. The real fear isn't that people will revolt tomorrow. It's that they will stop accepting simple answers. They will start demanding coherence, consistency, logic, and power built on controlled narratives struggles to survive in a world where people ask, does this actually make sense? That question alone has ended more regimes than any weapon. So when someone says, Putin will hate me for showing you this, it's not about provoking anger for attention. It's about crossing an invisible line, the line between consuming events and understanding them. Because once understanding spreads, control weakens. And that is something no authoritarian system can tolerate for long.